So as you know, two people can see. This is an overview of the key and type signatures for each movement. The first movement of the Three Wise Men is in the key, or begins in the key of A flat major. However, throughout the movement, Bonds treats both A flat and F major as equally viable candidates for tonic, and the work concludes in F major. The second movement, They Brought Fine Gifts, settles the tonal ambiguity of the first movement, for it is firmly in the key of A flat major. Similarly, movements 3 and 4 form a kind of pair, for they are both in the key of E flat major. Bonds' use of tertiary key relationships in the first movement also plays a role in the key structure of the fourth. The middle section of Mary Had a Little Baby tonicizes the key of G major, before returning and concluding in the key of B flat. In movements 5, 6, and 7, Bonds abandons the major modality for minor. And in the final two movements, the key of A flat major returns, asserting its role as tonic key for the entire work. In the July 7, 1961 letter, Bonds reveals that much of Ballad of the Brown King is based on the spiritual Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. The spiritual opens with a descending major sixth, and this melodic interval is set to a syncopated rhythmic pattern of an eighth note plus a quarter note plus an eighth note. Throughout Ballad of the Brown King, Bonds creates a sense of motivic and rhythmic cohesion through her use and transformation of the melodic contour and syncopated rhythm of this opening. In the first movement, the tenor solo, which is on this side, it begins in measure 9, and the shape of its melody recalls that of the spiritual. Maybe I'll see. So Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. I can't sing. Okay, so that's that, and I'll play it one more time, so you can sort of hear the. So you can sort of internalize the shape and contour of that opening, and the tenor solo. So I'll play the opening. And so the tenor solo, the shape of its melody recalls that of the spiritual, as do the syncopated rhythms that occur in the following measures of that opening. In measures 18 through 22, Bonds realizes this melody for mixed chorus, which is on this side. In the four-measure piano introduction to the second movement, the descending major sixth figure reappears in the first two measures, and continues to do so throughout the end of the movement. Looking ahead at Mary Had a Little Baby, the syncopated rhythm and intervallic shape of the piano introduction resembles that of the spiritual, the kind of descent and then rise back up to the original pitch, especially in the first measure, first two measures. The soprano solo of the same movement begins in the fifth measure, and the syncopated rhythms and outline of the descending sixth clearly reference what has been established as components of a recurring motif. So we have syncopated rhythms here and here, measures 1 and 3 of the solo, and the range of the first 4 measures of the solo are that of the descending minor sixth, from C to E flat. In movement 6, Could He Have Been an Ethiop?, the opening baritone solo begins with that syncopated rhythm. In the previous movements, Bonds had strictly used the melodic interval of a major sixth in a descending direction. Here, in the first measure, the baritone solo outlines an ascending minor sixth as he questions, could he have been an Ethiop? The major sixth has been transformed from a descending melodic interval to an ascending minor sixth, and it is this version that frames the opening in the seventh movement. The sopranos rise from a G right here to an E flat on the first part of the opening line, O sing of the king who is tall. Finally, the piano introduction from the second movement returns as the opening for the eighth. This is from the second movement, and this is from the eighth movement. They are exactly the same. From measures, this is the same movement in 8. From measures 5 to 9, the soprano melody is a variation on the tenor solo from the first movement. Just take my word for it, it is. All right, so Barnes' use of this motif, particularly at the beginning of movements, recalls the Renaissance practice of such composers as Guillaume Dufay, whose use of a motto or head motif unified movements of the Mass. While the interval of the sixths and the syncopated rhythmic patterns unify the cyclical piece, Bonds integrates the motif in a variety of textures, harmonies, keys, and moods. And its origins from the spiritual would be difficult to identify upon hearing it for the first time. Nevertheless, this work's motivic fabric, which is drawn from the spiritual, and Bonds' use of Black musical idioms such as jazz harmonies, calypso rhythms, and even the straight-up old-time gospel shuffle at the finale, all within the time-honored classical form, the cantata, reflects compositional ideals and trends of Black Harlem Renaissance composers. In his writings, Black intellectual Alan Locke addressed how Black composers could create masterpieces that would transcend racial lines. In The New Negro, which was published in 1925, Locke suggests that while African American composers should seek inspiration from Black folk musical traditions, they should incorporate such material into larger classical forms. He writes, "Up to the present, the resources of Negro music have been tentatively exploited in only one direction at a time. A genius that would organize its distinctive elements in a formal way would be the musical genius of his age. Equally with treasuring and appreciating the Negro folk song and the spiritual as music of the past, we must nurture and welcome its contribution to the music of tomorrow." Bonds' fusion of Black musical styles within Western classical forms reflects the influence by such composers as William Grant Still and Florence Price of the Harlem Renaissance generation. While Bonds continued this tradition with Ballad of the Brown King, Black composers of the 1950s and 60s were, as Samuel A. Floyd remarked, creating works that, quote, evaded social context. And Bonds was aware of this. On October 2nd, 1960, she lamented, "I did my best, but I could not get Negro composers to take an interest in him. Him was Fela Sawande." Cameron was kind. Ulysses Kay paid him the courtesy of coming to visit him and talk with him, but Kay made it clear, as he always has to me, that he has no time for ethnic music. Bonds was proud of her Negro heritage, and Ballad of the Brown King is so much the product of the historical and cultural context in which it was created and revised. Music gave a voice to the civil rights movement, and it is my hope that Bonds' voice, her response to the movement with Ballad of the Brown King, will encourage further research on how the movement affected the works of African American composers. And so I'll gladly take questions, comments, criticisms. Thank you. Are there any questions?
One comment. I wish I would have called you before I wrote my program.
No, I read them. worried that we would say the same
No,
thing.
wonderful.
Thank you. And I've never heard the piece, so I'm looking forward to it.
You're in for a treat.
I'll make a comment.
Yes.
You know, and I think there's still much to be said about black musicians, performers, and composers who still seek acceptance in the academy. And I even take it into consideration, performers take it into consideration if giving a solo recital. You know, you want to present Schubert, Bach, Brahms, all of those people first, because it says to the establishment or the academy that you are a musician. And so rather than delve into ethnic music, as you said that he was opposed to, I think sometimes they cling to that because that's where the acceptance is, and not from the point of just wanting to be accepted as a musician first and foremost, rather than as a musician who can sing ethnic music but who can also do other things, if that makes any sense. But anyway, when I heard you speak about Bonds and what she thought her social responsibility was, I'm reminded of the Black Composer Speaks, where is it Abdul interviews Undine Smith Moore, and she talks about, she makes a statement that the excellence of Andre Watts and Natalie Henderis was in itself an agent for social change. So I think these composers who sometimes may not have a strong connection or a stronger connection to, I think we can still look at them in the sense that their excellence still draws attention to them, and that excellence is in and of itself an instrument of social change. In other words, people do recognize and realize that.
Yeah, your words are recalling, I believe it was in 1922, James Weldon Johnson gave the commencement address at Hampton, and he talked about the great social gain in this and pursuing excellence in the arts, and so much a product of what people were writing about, and Johnson and Locke. They really looked up to these musicians and writers as cultural sort of ambassadors.
Ashley, I'm curious. I'm drawn to the fact that you're a harpist and pursuing her. She's pursuing her career as a harpist, and yet you chose a choral work. I found that fascinating, and I'm wondering, are you going to go further with this particular piece and this research on Margaret Bonds? But are you also going to look at some of the African American harp repertoire, such as Ulysses K's, Jersey Hours, and things like that, that are idiomatic for your own instrument? I just curious.
Yeah, I'm sort of toying with at the moment I have to go back home and look at and see if I can play 3 June portraits on the harp. I've been asked.
Oh.
I'm doing a lecture presentation on those works and other art songs. And the curator of that particular production wanted to know if I could play them on harp, and I would love to. I don't think I can. It's too chromatic,
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's interesting. My interests in research and as a writer, and then as a harpist, kind of different, and it's always sort of been like that.
That's why I was wondering if you would use some of the works that are actually written for harp in your work to. It is wonderful. I have a good friend, Lydia Cleaver, in Detroit, harpist in Detroit, who that's what she has done a lot of is African American music. She's done the transcriptions for.
Yeah.
I mean, she did several recitals with me, and she was playing the harp.
Right.
And we did that, and it's really interesting to do. But then she also did explore some of those that were, specifically, written well for the harp, because all the issues that the harp has with, like you just said, chromaticism.
Right. Yeah. There's a little bit of it.
Yeah. It's not quite the same as a piano.
And Brandy Younger, who's a New York-based harpist, plays a lot of Alice Coltrane, and helps the pilot.
I know Anne well.
She's had a really long career.
On the same note, look at Hale Smith's song cycle of Valley Wind. I mean, there's that, you could tell it was written with the sound of the piano in mind, but I wonder how much of it you could transfer to the harpist.
Yeah, I like it.
And Ashley, Winifred's name that I gave you yesterday.
Yes, I have her email.
Winifred Garrett.
Check with her, because I know she has transcribed a lot of spirituals and other art songs for the harp. And I mean, I think she's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm hoping to, if 3 Dream Portraits don't work, I'm hoping I can pitch the spirituals instead. Because those do work.
Well, I also hope you'll commission some people to
That
write
too.
some new repertoire that
All Bill Band
for you. Yeah.
Oh,
A lot of
Adolphus Hailstorm. He just wrote something, a solo cello sonata for me. I'm gonna look almost like Tommy Otten yesterday, you know, pages spread out all over the place just for one movement. But, yeah.
Well, I was going to say for NAMM as well, the competition that we already have African American harp repertoire listed as a part of the string competition. I did that years ago.
Okay.
So it, whenever it comes up next, but we already have the lists of what's out there and what's available
Yeah, okay.
to help you. But we applaud you and hope you will go further with your research.
Yeah.
I'd also like to say, sort of in wrapping this up, if there aren't more questions, if there are, I'll be quiet, but I just want to say thank you to Ashley and Alethea, because it's so encouraging to have ABDs doing their research and their work at a conference like this, because it helps those of us who have been doing it for a while to see the new blood coming in and carrying on, because that's what has to happen.
Right.
We're not going to get everything done in 1 generation, 2 generations, 3 generations. So watching the next level of interest in the subject is gratifying. And so we thank you on this actual 100th birthday of Margaret Bonds for you for doing this, for both of you. Appreciate that. Starting
Thank
and
you.
ending our conference in such a way. We appreciate it. Any other questions for her?
Can I, just out of curiosity, in your own study, applied study of the harp, has anyone ever given you literature by African American harp? I think that's what we have to change.
I think my teacher, she has a lot of music in her head, and she kind of throws out, there's a William Grant still, that's a chamber piece.
Yeah,
and she's like, have you played that? You know, she does.
She's aware.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
On an historical note, there is online, you might have to kind of dig around, it's, there's a family in Indianapolis, Indiana, I think the last name is Hart, maybe Lizzie Hart, but there was a family of performers, one of whom is a harpist. And again, it's one of those things that immediately makes one eyebrow go up, because it's not like, again, if y'all had a conference,
I know.
You fill the parking lot. I mean, maybe not, but again, and I get, people ask me questions every so often about, have you ever played in an all-black orchestra? I said, yeah. See, we do get together. Not all that often, but we do get together.
And I'd like to make one other statement before we close out, and that's to sort of amend something I said earlier, especially with Dr. Toppin sitting in the room. There are performers who program and do recitals of all black music constantly throughout the United States and in other places. So I just wanted to make sure that I got that out there.
I think the issue with Bonds, whenever I tell my colleagues or singers about what I'm writing, they love it. They think it's so interesting, and the few scores that I'm able to show to them, they love it. Pianists love it. I think it's partly because of the limited access to her music. I really think that's the number one hindrance. Anything I've heard by her, I've loved.
It's very striking and quite different.
Yeah.
And so many composers, as we've talked about, the output will begin to sound similar. But there are so many of her pieces. Everything I've played, it's different.
Yeah, but it has a distinct sound, sort of
exactly.
like Britain has it. You know, that kind of.
She just sprinkles in enough of those other elements that
Yeah.
they're present. You know, it's her identifier, and yet it's still unique. Every
Yeah.
piece is unique and set so
But
beautifully.
I also think about what Gregory Walker said yesterday, when he was asked the question about getting works scheduled, a program in symphony orchestras, and that difficulty that was there. And it's a difficulty that results out of practicality
Yeah.
in a very real sense. And so they're hesitant to do it because the masses of the people are not really in tune to that. And one thing I could say for at least the children's choir movement that occurred in this country, I think out of that movement will come students who will, as consumers of music, demand a variety of music, because that's a part of what they were trained in. The repertoire for that is so vast and so diverse. So as consumers, they may be the next generation that say, no, I don't want to hear just Bach and just Brahms or Mendelssohn. I want to hear these other composers as well. So I think that's the mission that we have, to raise that other generation.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you, Greg.